Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are very fortunate to have Jamie Harper with us, the Vice President of Education for Microsoft. I have many thanks, Jamie, for Jean-Philippe Courtois, who put the two of us together. Jean-Philippe is the Executive Vice President and President of Microsoft International, and he was. I had a chance to meet him when I was in Kazakhstan, and he put me in touch with Jamie, and Jamie and I talked, and very, very happy to have Jamie with us today. He's got a lot of very insightful, just messages that he has for us with regards to what's going on in education right now, especially in this very interesting environment. But let me introduce Jamie, please. Jamie, as the Vice President of U.S. Education for Microsoft, Jamie leads a team that supports higher education and K through 12 organizations across the United States. His organization was recognized as the top team with Microsoft in both 2019 and 2018. Pretty incredible, considering especially how global of an organization Microsoft is. The U.S. education team supports initiatives impacting students, teachers, and leaders, both public and private. When I discussed this a little bit with my daughter this afternoon, and she said, "Wow, Minecraft, really?" Previously, Jamie served as the general manager of 10 countries in Asia. He was responsible for all of Microsoft products, services, and staff across these countries. Prior to his role in Asia, Jamie was based in Johannesburg, South Africa, where he led Microsoft South Africa's enterprise business supporting corporate clients, which was the largest segment within the subsidiary. He joined Microsoft in 1999 as part of their MBA recruiting program, which I thought was very interesting, especially very relevant to our audience today. Prior to Microsoft, Jamie worked for Coca-Cola, as well as Westinghouse Power Generation. Throughout his career, Jamie has supported a variety of nonprofit organizations, including serving on the board of directors for the American International School of Johannesburg and chair of the advisory board for the engineering school, basically the general engineering program at Clemson University. Without further ado, I want to welcome Jamie to Mays Business School. Great to have you here via Zoom.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much, Richard, and thanks so much to the whole team. What I thought I would do is a few things. I'd maybe talk a little bit about an optimistic story in terms of these times, which I think is maybe useful. Tell a little bit about a cultural story, which I think might be insightful, as many of you will then go off into the workforce and be evaluating that. And then talk a little bit about, kind of the state of the workforce that I see interacting with a lot of different, both higher education and corporate leaders. But what I'm sharing here is again, the optimism. And so the red circles you see on the slide, which is essentially the S&P 500 index tracked all the way back to the beginning of the century. And the red circles represent, things that happen in my life that, might be, might you be able to connect to. The first circle on the left is when I graduated college. So all these circles, just as a bit of a premise, are all downturns in the economy. So for good or for bad, many things that happened in my life were essentially associated with big downturns, which were huge learning opportunities for me. The second circle there is when I finished grad school and when I went into the workforce, as Richard said, in 1999, joining Microsoft, kind of through their MBA recruiting program. And the third circle there is the 2008 downturn when I moved to Johannesburg in South Africa, which was a huge shift for me. I've got 3 kids who are now teenagers, one of which is in college. And this was a huge move. And then as we went there, obviously the currencies were depressed in big parts of the country. And the reason I share this is upon reflection through the lens of history, these were actually some of the biggest learning moments I had probably throughout my career. And, I think the opportunity that we have here with COVID is, hopefully that, us individually in the world will be better prepared going forward. So, the most important thing is obviously I wish everyone has good health and safety now. and we get through this. But my hope is that history is again, looks back upon this as an opportunity for us to all learn and grow. So with that, let me move a little bit into a bit of a cultural story, which I think will be important for you as you start to look at places that you might want to go work for, or are evaluating those businesses in your studies. And this, for many of you who might know, although it's a bit it's a bit of an older company now in retrospect. Microsoft is about 45 years old. It was founded in 1975. And on the left, the gentleman with a beard is Paul Allen, the late Paul Allen, who befriended Bill Gates there on the right when they grew up together in Seattle. And so, they had essentially a goal to put a computer on every desk, was essentially their mission for many years. And there was just been a big transition, both in the culture of the business and the leadership of the business. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Today we're a very big company, very global company. We have a lot of different pieces, but I think the insightful story is the story of the leadership and the culture inside the company. And what I'm showing here in this picture is essentially the 3 CEOs we've had in our time. And you're going to laugh at the cameras in the background. Yes, those are Nokia camera phones, back in 2014. And believe it or not, that was a thing back then. That would all be, mostly Apple and Android phones today. But the reason I share this is the founder on the left, Bill Gates, really had a culture as the founder of Microsoft is very hard charging, very driven. There's a lot of interesting anecdotes about him. He was one of the first to kind of put snacks and drinks in the workplace, in hopes that the computer programmers would stay and work longer hours. And so he was a relentless work ethic, obviously a very, very brilliant leader. On the far side of the screen, the man with the other grin on his face is Steve Ballmer, who was really a disciple of Bill Gates. They met together at Harvard. Bill obviously famously dropped out of Harvard. Steve Ballmer actually got a degree in math and then actually dropped out of Stanford Business School to join Bill Gates, who was recruiting his friend. And Ballmer ended up being CEO for over 10 years, but also a very hard charging culture. The stories, and I participated in a lot of these things, these business reviews that were often referred to as math camps, right? In terms of the very driven, very numeric oriented culture. And then here comes in the middle, this is our current CEO, Satya Nadella, who had been at the company for some time, essentially, raised in India, came actually and did a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and had a different experience through the company. And I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of the story of the cultural change that he's kind of led. And, when he first joined, we were, I would argue, a middle-aged tech company that was doing okay, but we missed a lot of very important technology trends. And, he really pushed us to say, what really are we about? What's our point of view on the world? And he set about in 2014 to really change Microsoft. And he started with, believe it or not, we had a lot of visions and missions throughout our 40 plus years, but Satya came in and really focused us on this mission of empowering every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And then he set out to embody that day to day, but he realized it couldn't be a top-down mantra. So he really understood that if he didn't change the culture, and this is a picture of Peter Drucker, as I'm sure you all know, is a kind of very famous business strategist. And he has this saying of culture eats strategy for breakfast. We could have this great strategy, but even 2 firms in the same industry that have the same products actually would have different results because of the people. And so this was not lost upon Satya. And so he really went upon building the culture kind of from the ground up. And this is a quote from an interview that he did in 2017. But he really had to make sure that he drove on changing the culture from the programming and the technical team all the way through marketing, all the way through distribution, sales. I mean, it was a global company, and changing the culture was very, very, very hard in terms of to do that at scale. And he really locked on a few things, one of which is this changing the culture from what he described as a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. And, Satya is a very humble individual. And, that was a big epiphany for us in terms of this new, what he described as a growth mindset. And he really focused the company on a few different areas. And how he described growth mindset was very much coming from the customer. So it wasn't creating, kind of gee whiz technology, but it was kind of being focused on what the customer needed. Really also embracing diversity and inclusion, and also operating as one organization, lined up behind that. And then again, lined up against our mission to make a difference. And this was how he kind of set about doing this, both across his leadership team, and then again, interacting very often with tons of customers. 2 years ago, he did a brief presentation to a group of us, and he said he did 1,000 customer contacts in 1 year, in the year 2019. And a lot of those were on the phone, a lot of those were in person, kind of before COVID. But it just talks about how he wanted to embody and lead by example this customer obsession and get feedback from the customer. So, I share that because it was actually very difficult inside. We had a lot of built up over many years, a lot of processes and systems and behaviors that were very difficult to change. And I want to go through a couple examples, which I think he really showcased a cultural change in the company. And the first is, for many of you who've either been in the workplace or have heard of it, the performance review process is not one that really inspires people to kind of go and have a great experience that day. Oftentimes it can be very hierarchical, or even demeaning. And so at Microsoft, it was very similar. And so he went about changing this to basically moving away from I never make mistakes, I never miss a metric, what he described as a fixed mindset, to moving to hey, these are some of the places I took chances in different areas. Some of them panned out. Some of them were great learning opportunities for me. So that's an individual discussion. But then he also brought in these other two circles of how did I contribute to others' success? And then how did I borrow best practices from others into what I do in my business? And so this concept of having an impact versus activity was a huge change inside of our company. And so this is something that actually we're working on this month of May, that we go and we have these kind of discussions, which we refer to as kind of connects with our employees and talk about their impact. And it's been absolutely game changing inside of our company because we have to talk about how we're helping others in the discussion. So it was just a huge change. And the other one I think was really important is how he leaned in on these concept of leadership principles. And one of the things that I experienced at Microsoft is we would often get a very long list of color-coded metrics. And I started after my MBA, I started in the finance organization, and I moved through marketing, sales, operations, a bunch of different roles. And every year was a new long list of 40 plus metrics. And it was very complex to run the business, both internally, to our partners, to our customers. And one of the things he did around this cultural change is to really focus on these leadership principles, with the first being purposeful, creating clarity, and not having these very long, complex matrices anymore, and really trying to narrow and distill down to a very simple, defined course of action. The second, he's very much an optimist, and the concept of being able to generate energy as a leader. And today it's even more important, as we have to do a lot of meetings like this, like a virtual discussion. And people might hear a lot of bad news repeatedly, either about their own family members, their community, working with our customers or our partners. And so being able to inspire optimism became kind of a first party goal through our leadership, which was just super important for us and working with our customers and partners. And we saw that as we would do surveys of our customers on how they saw the change at Microsoft, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the last is just deliver success. And success, historically had been very dollar oriented. And then it really changed to be more innovation oriented. Like, what are the things that customers are asking for? And can we deliver that? And can we do that in a way we're constantly improving and getting better? So, I think that's the second example that was really impactful. And as we saw that start to take light, what I'm showing here is, some examples of, even in 2012, the Microsoft culture was not a great place. And, we'd go on college campuses and it was very difficult to recruit, even to a company that was very big and very profitable. But essentially over time, what we saw was this change started to really ripple through both our customers, our partners, and our employees. And and then he obviously published a book where he talked a little bit about this called Hit Refresh, and talks all about him personally, his family, his upbringing, and it really has changed a lot of how we are perceived both in the marketplace and with our employees. And it really has kind of set Microsoft in a new direction. And what I'm showing here is just in the past year, we've tried to become more of a leader in terms of both societal issues and technology issues. And so these are just three initiatives we've launched in the last 12 months. One is to become essentially carbon negative. And this was a huge initiative that we launched. And these are our three leaders: Satya, Amy Hood, our CFO in the middle, and Brad Smith. And then another one was, obviously Seattle, our hometown for our headquarters, has a huge affordable housing issue. And so we were kind of one of the first that stood up and said, we want to help in this area with a $500 million donation there, which really started, subsequently after that, a lot of other technology companies started leaning in and trying to help because they have a similar problem in terms of both Silicon Valley, Seattle, now even DC and New York have big problems with affordable housing. And then the last one I mentioned there is this artificial intelligence area, which was getting a lot of press for being used in a very negative way against, essentially taking people's privacy. And so we launched a set of principles that, Brad and the team has been advocating both at the government level in different countries and also the state level, essentially to make sure there's a set of principles and how artificial intelligence is used, throughout society. So, those are, I think, three examples where it shows, and I'm very proud as an employee of Microsoft to see us leaning in on some of these issues where I think in the past we would sit back and follow. I think now more and more, certainly as Satya is coming across now as his 6 years as a CEO, he puts out big problems for us to work on together. I'll transition a little bit to, what we do on college campuses. And, I've been with Satya on many of these different college campuses. And, we hire over 5,000 people from colleges just in the US every year. A lot of that's into the technical or the product group. But we'll hire from all over, and more we're trying to focus on diversity, not going to the usual suspect campuses, and actually looking across the country. And what we've realized is that there's fantastic people throughout. And so that's why, very excited to hear, and actually Texas A&M, we have a member of Texas A&M on our higher education advisory board. And very proud to, to support Texas A&M. We do a lot of hiring from the university, both the engineering school, business school, et cetera. But this is a quote I thought was interesting where he, and again, a lot of our passion of our culture focuses on the service of others in this kind of servant leader model. And, I think that really is now resonating to where we're actually a brand that we come on campus, or we're actually even doing a lot of remote or virtual recruiting. We're able to kind of get some of the top talent at universities, and we're very proud of that. So, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but I also wanted to, perhaps share some advice that I'm hearing and that I've experienced as well in terms of, if I'm sitting in your shoes today, what would I be thinking about? And the first is, this is a little bit of a data snip from the Wall Street Journal from this past week. And it talks about the opportunities that are still out there in the workplace today. And I've taken a lot of different customers, corporate entities, different industries. And essentially the quote I would tell you is that every company is a technology company. And whether it's whatever industry it's in, it has data analysts, it has business analysts. They're looking at how they're leveraging machine learning, how they're using cloud computing, and they're all transforming at some pace. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for people to come out with the skill set that you're going to be getting at Texas A&M or already have, to go out and help transform businesses. And this is just an example of these kind of circles in the middle about the number of open positions that happen to have information technology in the title. But that represents tons of industries. And there's a lot of roles that we don't even really understand yet, this intersection of data, machine learning, customers, developing new products almost in a real-time fashion. We stood up a chat bot for COVID-19 for a lot of academic medical centers, a lot of hospitals. They were getting tons of phone calls on testing, symptoms. So we did an automated kind of symptom checker with the Center for Disease Control, and then rolled that same kind of logic out, which is now being picked up and it's free. It's being used by tons of different hospitals. That's not something we could even have considered, what that would really look like. And then real-time guiding people to kind of how to go get care, depending on the region, because New York has a different kind of process than Nebraska. And again, the opportunities are very, very significant. So I would say technology, my headline is technology is an opportunity. And then these next kind of 3 bullets are a little more prescriptive. My experience was, and I think it's very relevant today, is kind of being flexible. I sent out and applied for a lot of different jobs coming out of engineering school. And there were some industries that were hiring and some that weren't in that recession. And so I had to kind of pivot and be flexible and take a role because I wanted to, and this is kind of a famous quote that I've heard from an economist, get on the train of employment so you can go and get experience. You can always, change trains, but you want to be moving. And so I think that's one of the things that sometimes when I interview different people, they're looking for the perfect job. And in a recession, sometimes those are harder to come by. And so I think that's great advice that I'd pass on. And the last one is this: learn and gain experience. You can learn in any role. You can gain experience in any role. And, so sometimes people don't want to go work for, and when I even did this internship for Coca-Cola, the advice I got from my mentor at Coca-Cola was, hey, go in the technology industry. Coca-Cola is not transforming at the pace that I think we should be. And he actually told me to not take the permanent job offer with Coke and go someplace else and set me on a path. And so I think that I've been very fortunate to have a series of good mentors in my career. And I'll kind of close with this. And I share the slide. It represents the time I've spent with Microsoft. And the most important part of this slide is actually the left-hand side, right? It's essentially where the Microsoft share price was unchanged in over a decade. Because this was probably the most important time at Microsoft that I had. The profitability of the company was still good, but the stock price really didn't move for a long time. And this is when a lot of very big companies were launched, Google, Amazon, et cetera. But I had opportunities to go run countries, take my family and move to different parts of the world and, run big businesses, take on new responsibilities with, again, great leaders and great roles. And so I share that because whatever path you select, I think the important thing sometimes to think about is the learning opportunity that you'll have, the cultural opportunity you'll have. And my experience both in 1999, when I saw a ton of people leaving in 98 to get on the dot-com boom, only to see those businesses kind of crater. And then, people have to essentially go look for new employment shortly after they had even taken a job with a startup. So there's tons of experience opportunities with big companies, with small companies. And so take advantage of those, that you can learn in any of those scenarios, whether it's Microsoft or any other kind of company as you look forward in your career. So those are essentially the comments that I wanted to kind of kick us off with. I hope I covered a few different areas, and I'd love to maybe open it up a little bit to the crowd now and take some questions. So I'll go ahead and kind of stop sharing and see if I can see anything that's coming online.
Excellent. If for any of you that want to ask a question, you can either type it into the chat box or you can raise your virtual hand, and then we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Jamie. Very interesting presentation, Jamie. I think, man, you really hit on so many very interesting topics.
Thanks, Richard. And I can see the chat window too. So if folks want to feel more comfortable going to the chat window, I'm happy to answer them there too.
Richard, I can't raise my virtual hand since I'm part of the core group, so I'm going to raise my physical hand. I have a quick question for you, Jamie. With the current CEO coming in and changing that culture, cultural change is very difficult. How did he navigate that as to not step on the old culture or, you know, what the two prior leaders had brought to that organization, and navigate that very carefully, but still enable that culture shift in the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sarah. So, and a couple things to note. So Steve Ballmer is still the biggest individual shareholder of Microsoft, right? So when even though he stepped down as CEO, he owns, $20 billion worth of Microsoft shares. And then Bill Gates was on the board. Right. So imagine this scenario where you come in and your two predecessors, the only two CEOs in the history of the company, are still very closely related to the organization. So he had to make some hard decisions. And this is a little bit of the benefit of being an insider versus an outsider. There was a very big search process to pick the successor for Ballmer. And he really took on some super big political issues straight away. And I'll give you a few examples. So Ballmer bought, for almost $10 billion, bought Nokia. And Satya quickly wrote it off, said, we're not going to be in the phone business. And also, there was a very famous, hey, we're not going to go onto different platforms. And Satya said, no, actually, we need to be cross-platform to be successful. So I'm going to release Office for the iPad, and I'm going to embrace Linux and the open source community. And subsequently, we've bought GitHub and LinkedIn, which many of you are on, I know, because you already have pinged me. And there's a lot of different things that he took on very early to say, nothing is going to be off limits. For us in terms of this cultural change. So he very early, I would say, sir, probably within the first 3 months, made some huge decisions that kind of rocked the organization back on its heels. And then he started this process change for how people would be reviewed. He took the Windows franchise and really kind of put it under the cloud computing organization, which was a huge reorganization because Ballmer really believed in the kind of gross margin of Windows. And Satya really said, actually, cloud computing is our future. And so I think in the first year, he made enough big decisions that basically he kind of said, this is my organization and we're going to lead in a different direction. So I think that really helped us, everyone sort of feel more comfortable with risk taking in our own jobs. And it's really grown from there. It's a great question.
Excellent. You may see JP McGill. JP's on our MBA advisory board. He asks, education is going to be going through a huge change for K through 12, colleges as well. What are the things you are looking at as a leading tech company to meet that challenge?
Yeah, it's huge. And it's actually very insightful in terms of K-12 and higher ed are different. So I'll tell a story in terms of how they both reacted to kind of COVID, and then hopefully get to your question in terms of what we're doing. So K-12 forever has been very much a in-person experience. As I said, I've got 3 teenagers. They go to school, they sit in the class. There's a little bit of what they call kind of flipped learning, where they'd be assigned some amount of content to consume on their own. But the vast majority of schools in this country, 50 million children who go to the K-12 system every day, get their learning face-to-face. So when COVID hit and they had to go to what I describe as kind of emergency remote learning, it was very, very difficult for K-12 organizations. And a few big chasms emerged, one of which is there's a huge portion of our population in this country that's on free and reduced lunch, essentially low socioeconomic students who didn't have access to either the technology, i.e. they didn't have great Wi-Fi to do the experience that we're doing right now, or a device or an environment, even if they had the device and the Wi-Fi, where they can sit in a quiet room and study. And that became a huge barrier. And then as the teachers have to take care of their own families and then try to teach, they weren't really trained in online learning. It's a very different dynamic than managing a classroom in K-12. And, you know, depending on what happens with this virus, I believe, you know, portions of K-12 will permanently change to be thinking about both access. And so as a technology company, we think about that a lot. And also instruction. And so we've done some things because we're very concerned about how there's a thing called a summer slide, right? For a lot of the educators on this call will say, hey, what you learn in the spring, when you show up again in the fall, you might not remember all that algebra 2 or that differential equations or whatever you studied. And so we're very concerned about this slide. So we're investing actually in a lot of different places, including the state of Texas, California, and Florida, around math instruction. And how can math instruction, which typically is very reliant on face-to-face instruction, as you can imagine, doing problems, how does that get better in this kind of online learning scenario? I think so. That's one of many different things we're working on, but access and equity are a couple big ones. Higher ed's a little different. Higher ed, in many cases, they had some sort of muscle built for remote or online classes. But what we discovered is that the College of Engineering was very different than the College of Business versus the College of Medicine. And so they all kind of did their own thing. And, you know, I'll just share from my children who are kind of experiencing college. They would have a different experience. Some would use one technology platform. Some are more technology savvy than others in terms of their professors or instructors. And so they had a very wide ranging experience, where a K-12 system can say, you'll use this platform and this technology. In higher education, you might have one professor who emails you the assignments, one who posts it on some sort of learning management system, and one who sends really nothing and struggles with technology from the get-go. So it actually made those students, specifically first generation college students, it was very difficult for them when we moved to this remote instruction environment. And so much so that we're actually seeing a lot of students not reapplying for their financial aid for next year. So, you know, that number is down 3 to 4% already for the fall. You know, these are just from the returning students. So we think we've actually, this access issue is going to impact and have a bit of an echo effect for some years to come. So Microsoft, again, we're trying to figure out how can we leverage our platform both in the technology, and also we have a lot of instructional learning specialists. And how do we go teach people? So we've been doing nothing but remote training for schools and universities, you know, really since February, to help them do this move. And we've seen, you know, we've got a platform called Teams, Microsoft Teams, and it essentially does a lot of different learning management, but that's grown from about 600,000 per month in the past 12 months to now we're over 7 million per month users. And, you know, and it's probably going to start to wind down here for the summer, but there's a lot to be done there because there's a lot of anxiety over the fall and how that gets better. So sorry for the long-winded question, but that was a really good one.
I'm just trying to keep it in order. Janet Marcantonio, faculty member in the graduate programs office, asks, what will higher education in American society and the world look like 10 to 20 years from now?
Yeah, so I'll be
crystal ball.
Yeah, I'll be a bit more abbreviated. Again, no one knows with any certainty, but what I'll tell you is that higher education has been a kind of an innovation engine for a lot of communities. And in many communities, it's the #1 employer of people. And so even if it's a small university, Muhlenberg in Pennsylvania, or you know, if you look across the country, of the 5,000 higher education institutions, probably 2,000 of them live on the border of insolvency. And so every year we have about 60 small higher eds that go out of business. I think that will accelerate. And, you know, we've been predicting that for years. I do think this is going to be the cash flow that's relied on for the fall tuition really is going to be very, very impactful. And I think we will start to see that number of 60 that kind of go bankrupt or shut down every year more than double this year, and maybe even triple. And so I just don't think there'll be enough funds and the demographics of our country are such that we were relying on a lot of international students. And so it's almost become a perfect storm. And so I think a lot of the smaller institutions will fall away. And I do think, you know, just a plug for Texas A&M, you really are on the forefront of being able to deliver high quality education to a very diverse audience at scale and with outcomes. And it's believe it or not, that's actually very difficult to do in a lot of other parts of the world. So I actually think this flipped and remote learning will be a new muscle. I think higher ed will embrace it more than others. I think some people can leverage it better. And so I think the haves, Texas A&M, et cetera, will actually thrive. There'll be a culling of the smaller ones. And I think it'll be a state of flux for several years as it kind of shakes out. But it's absolutely going to be a very difficult time, I think, in the next 12 to 18 months. Good question.
Great. I know Shreya has been waiting to ask a question. Shreya is one of our full-time MBA students. So Shreya, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Richard. Hi, Jamie. So my question is, you mentioned about optimism playing an important part in Microsoft's culture. So my question is around that how has Microsoft navigated through the challenging times like recession in the past, and how has that evolved with optimism playing an important role, and especially in these COVID times?
Yeah, Shreya, great question. You know, I think I'm very fortunate that our culture had evolved, because I think in the old Microsoft world, I would have had to been on a lot of phone calls saying, you know, why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? And instead, I was on a lot of phone calls as COVID started to roll. And we saw it come quite early because we have a huge operation and a lot of partners that do a lot of supply chain, obviously, in Southern China. And the phone calls came across of, how can I help? What can we do? How can we help education? How can we help customers? And then as it came across to Seattle, obviously that's our headquarters area. And so we were doing a lot to do obviously various donations to Seattle public schools, the schools around us, the universities. But that culture was very much a customer obsessed. Hey, what can we do to help? And honestly, we thought we knew the answer, but oftentimes when we sat back and listened, we got asked for things that, you know, honestly, a lot of the things that public schools do, just as an example, is they have to provide meals. And so one of the things, there's big homeless or home risk students in K-12 schools. And what they really needed was the infrastructure to continue to run their cafeterias, but now remotely. So they had to kind of go to various schools and have meals for these low income students that relied on those meals that the schools were providing. So there was, you know, things like that. And, you know, in the higher ed space, to give you an example, when colleges had to figure out how to process, as they sent a lot of students home, spring break was going to be a big problem because it potentially was bringing kids from all over the world back to campus who might have then spread COVID. And, you know, a lot of these universities don't have huge health footprints. There was no ability to test. So they were making decisions to essentially keep kids and students away from coming back to campus. And so that meant processing or making decisions to process refunds. And so that's a very difficult cash flow decision for universities. And then obviously a lot of students couldn't go home. So for university campuses, you had to have remote learning, in-person learning, and still providing meals for some international and low-income students who couldn't go home. So when we sat back and listened in kind of the new culture, we were asked for things we thought we were going to we asked for money or technology donations, but the things we were asked for were very different. And I think that really helped us in this. And believe it or not, we've done a ton for our own employees as well. We get an email essentially every week from Satya's leadership team on how they're analyzing the coronavirus spread. And then we've actually closed down as a company, and this is public information, through October, and canceled all of our in-person events. So we've put the kind of the health and well-being of our employees, our customers and our partners kind of at the forefront, which, you know, feels good as an employee of Microsoft. Good question, Shreya.
Thank you.
That's awesome, Jamie. I had one on here also, and then we'll get to Katie's. Madhur, hold on one second. Madhur, he asked, my question is how a great culture helps a company to ward off difficult times like 2008 crisis or current coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I think two of the things that comes to mind is you have a different perspective. You have perhaps a longer term perspective versus a short term perspective. And the examples I'll give you is I've got a lot of friends in other industries, and they're quickly having to come to decisions on their business because their business is impacted. And so they have to make a decision. If they're a publicly traded company, they have to look at layoffs, how's this going to impact their earnings? And it's a very difficult and kind of painful decision. And I think, and I want to acknowledge and have a lot of empathy for that, because in some of these industries, hospitality, travel, et cetera, they're going to be permanently impacted, I think, for years. And I think, again, very fortunate in terms of as a technology company, there's a lot of opportunity for us to leverage technology more through this. And so how do we lean in to help the healthcare industry, education industry, the federal government, which is a big partner of Microsoft. And so I think some of the things that we've looked at as our CEO, it didn't kind of come in and say, hey, how do we kind of make our short-term numbers for this quarter and next quarter? Instead, he said, what can we do to help? And then what should we be doing? And so he's done a lot of things, donating to communities, donating to different places. We've done some things to help our customers when they need, they might not be able to pay their bills. We don't really know when they can pay their bills. So we have to kind of essentially extend loans to them. And, our CFO had kind of a famous quote back, like, I don't want to be a bank, but I also want to take care of our customers, right? So I think a lot of things is that comes from the leadership and the culture of the company on down to help. And, we all believe that once we get over this, the strength of certainly the US economy will kind of help us rebound very quickly, but we just don't know when that will be. So being in an uncertain place is also very difficult. It's draining on employees. Like the mental health of employees is very hard. And so we've leaned in hard with a lot of additional resources on mental health. And so, we've even worked with our partners at places like Johns Hopkins, who provide some kind of recommendations even back to us on, they've studied this, like what's the physiology and psychology of how people deal with crises. And so I think that's because of our culture. That's the way we've gone versus, hey, we've got to lay off to meet our quarterly numbers. And so I think that's a few examples there.
Katie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Richard. I'm an incoming full-time MBA student at A&M, but also did my undergrad at Clemson, so fun to otherwise in here. My question is, within the first 5 or so years of your career, what is one of the biggest risks that you took, and what impact did it have overall?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I had an opportunity to go chase a lot of money after grad school. And so transparently, I was married, we were expecting our first child, and I had to make a decision on chasing a big consulting opportunity, which would have meant a lot of travel. I had an opportunity to go to Coca-Cola, or I had this opportunity with Microsoft. And honestly, back in 1999, Microsoft really wasn't the cool technology company. And in fact, it was the lowest of the compensation I had. And I laughed that it was still paid on a lot of stock options, and those stock options at that point were worthless because of the .com crash. So everything on paper said this is a really bad choice to kind of go to Microsoft. So, but I thought that technology was not something that I had spent a lot of time in, and the advice I'd gotten from people is go learn about technology. And I think so. I'd say that was one. And then you're very clever to ask the question in the first 5 years, because you're spot on. You have some decisions to make very early in your career. I know you're going to work very hard and make a huge impact. And all of you are going to get an opportunity early in your career to take this path or that path. And I initially declined taking a lot of risk because I had a young child at home, and then I became a little bit more comfortable with risk. And I had a very supportive family who said, hey, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So I took several jobs that I don't think I was qualified for early in my career. And it was in an uncomfortable zone. And you're learning when you're uncomfortable going to work every day, or you're in meetings like, I really don't know the answer, and I got to go figure this out. So I think, taking some of the risks and looking long term were probably some of the advice I'd pass on. But it's a great question, Katie.
Thank you. Yeah, it's neat to see that you've worked in so many different facets of the business too. That's pretty inspiring to know that you don't just have to lock yourself down to one function, I guess. So.
Yeah, I mean, transparently, I was a terrible engineer. I was okay, right? I mean, so I like the math part of it. I like but I saw people who were so creative around me. I'm like, I'm not as good as these people here. So I pivoted to grad school, and I found a niche that was more in statistics, economics, finance, but then I found people who were much better than me at that too. So I just kind of had to reinvent myself different ways as I came through my career. And certainly in the generations today, I see that they have 5 or 6 different jobs, inside of 10 or 15 years outside of their college experience. And so being able to learn and change and grow, that's the skill, being able to learn, right? Whatever I learned, Fortran programming, no one uses that today, right? And so it's, if you aren't writing Python, but 5 years from now, it'll be something else. And I think the ability to learn and grow and change is a skill that I've been fortunate to kind of leverage.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Aaliyah, incoming MS-Business student, asks, as VP of Education, what would you like to see Microsoft move into next? She says, I know you've already mentioned affordable housing is something Microsoft is tackling.
Yeah, I'd say 2 things. So I worry a lot about math education. So I mentioned that earlier. So I actually think we have some things going on in our country demographically. We have a lot of teachers retiring. The job of a teacher is not as attractive anymore, and it's very difficult. So that would be one. So I'm trying to have Microsoft, and we've invested about $3 million recently into some different grants and programs, but I think we need to be doing more. And we're not masters of it, so we go find people who are really good. The second one is research. And what I'd tell you is I've spent a lot of time with people who lead research at these big R1 universities, and they describe it as a collective of individuals who are all focused on their own thing, and maybe not always working together for the betterment of either that institution, society, et cetera. And so they can chase writing a paper, chase a grant. And so I think the world of research today, certainly in the top 150 or so research universities in this country, really has both an efficiency problem and a focus problem. And, one of the silver linings of this COVID issue is you're seeing the scientific community of this country and really the world kind of laser focused on this issue. And it's amazing what they've been able to accomplish. But I really hope that our research muscle in this country takes advantage of technology. There's a lot of places that really still have very antiquated, hey, my high performance computing is this box in the corner. I'm going to queue for my job, run my statistical analysis, work with my grad assistant. It really is like research from the 1980s versus when I see these grad students today who are real time doing machine learning language on real time data sets and coming with kind of real time insights that can be put right back into the current project or initiative they're working on. It's almost like these are both R1 universities, but the experiences, as my British friends would say, chalk and cheese in terms of what they're able to do. So that's some place that we're spending a lot of time. Microsoft Research is a very well-known entity. So I've been working with the Microsoft Research team, and we announced a series of Microsoft Research Fellows across about a dozen or so universities who are on this doing research faster at scale. And so that's something I really want to make sure Microsoft does to help in that higher ed space. But good question.
I don't see anybody with a current question, so I'm going to ask you a quick question myself.
Okay, sure.
If you don't mind. So we have obviously on this call, we've got a number of incoming full-time MBA students, a number of incoming MS-Business students. You've already given some really amazing advice, Jamie, especially to Katie. You said, 5 years out. But what about our, as students looking for either full-time MBA internships or our MS-Business students that will basically be looking for a full-time job almost immediately when they enter the program, because
Right.
it would be for next year. What advice would you give them if they were seeking such a quality job, with Microsoft, like just something that, for example, they could be doing now to prepare for that?
Yeah. And so I think I'll go back to a comment I made earlier. You can do an amazing job at any company in any industry, big or small. And I'll give you an example. I've got a nephew who went to the University of South Florida and was a business student. And he was asking, hey, Uncle Jamie, what can I be doing to go get a great job? I said, well, honestly, cybersecurity is a really important topic for people. You don't need to be a cybersecurity expert, but can you talk about the threats and issues of cybersecurity for any entity? And he was working for a very small company at the time, but he did some independent research and said, hey, the security of our company actually isn't very good. You might have this problem, that problem, this problem. So he had an internship that, many people might have said is a blue chip company, but he ended up getting a title of, I think the founder gave him the title of cybersecurity analyst. And so he had a whole side project where he was analyzing the cybersecurity of the small firm. He's a business school student, right? But he went and dug into it and ended up taking a lot of classes in IT as he finished his business school curriculum. And that's just one example. I've seen people where they, I'm going to do a side thing on machine learning. I'm not quite sure what that is. And so whatever role you go into, whether it's you're looking for an internship or you're immediately looking for a job, look at the experiences you've had and the passions that you've had, whether it's in the classroom or outside, and tell your story. Hey, here's the value that I can add to you today. And, sometimes people they project what they can do, in the future, 2 years, 5 years. I would try to sell what value can you bring today. And I often see that, when people who can tell that story about themselves without having to walk through the whole resume and to be able to kind of net that out, hey, I can bring value to you today based on the experience I have. And you already have a great brand, right? Texas A&M is a fantastically well-known entity. And the business school is also very well known. So you don't need to play that up as much as be able to just tell your story. And so I wouldn't get so caught up in, you've taken this class, which is going to be able to, change the strategy or culture of an organization, but talk about your near-term value, especially in times like today.
Sounds like having your 30-second elevator pitch.
Right. Down. That is an absolutely best practice for sure.
Yeah. And certainly, as you said, what value you bring to the organization. I think that's huge. Yeah. Well, listen, this is a great time. I think, Jamie, if it's possible, maybe you have just a few closing points or a closing message for everybody.
Yeah. And so what I would leave you with is, really, we have a big responsibility. Everyone in this call, if you start to look at the world and who has the kind of education that you have, the kind of resources that you have, it really puts us in the, I tell my family this all the time, if you're up here, you're in the top 1-2% of Earth in terms of the resources, education. And so what are you going to do with that? What's your responsibility? And absolutely, you want to make sure you have a great job and a great career and great experience. But find that personal mission. Like, where do you want to go make an impact? And when you kind of line that kind of personal mission, even if it's only in pockets of what you do every day, you personally will feel more fulfilled in terms of that impact. And you'll actually feel better and you'll actually do better. And there's so many examples where we've put people, whether it's at Microsoft or, friends or colleagues I know, and they've changed. Maybe not even change their employer, but change the job inside of the company they work for that was more aligned to what they want to do personally. And I would just say you need to find that. And no job is perfect, right? Sometimes I've heard some stats that say, there's about 20% of your job you're going to like sometimes. And your job is to kind of grow that percentage over time, or go find one that is. But when you find those sweet spots where you feel like, you're making an impact personally that's aligned to something that's important to you, that's a special place. So I think you're never actually there. You're always on that journey to get there and to make a bigger impact. But that's a responsibility I think that we have today. So Richard, that's it. That's my closing thoughts.
That's great. Great, Jamie. I don't see anyone else with any last remaining questions. So, hey, man, just really want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Top notch all the way. I think a lot of people got some good insights, good advice for their own personal lives and careers and so forth. And certainly for those that weren't able to join us today, we did record it. Thank you very much for allowing us to do that so that they can hop on and they can see it, if they weren't able to join. My pleasure. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for all that you're doing. Good luck to the whole group. And, I wish you obviously stay safe and be well. Thanks so much. I owe you one. Oh, my pleasure. Take care. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Jamie. Bye-bye.
Thank you.